You are guilty of treason." The words echoed through the royal throne hall like a death sentence. Queen Evelyn Ashcroft didn't react. She simply stared at the battle maps spread across the council table. "I've never seen those before." No one answered. Outside, church bells rang for the soldiers who would never return home. 3 days earlier, the Alpha Kingdom's Western Army had marched confidently through Blackstone Pass. Only 5 generals knew the route, yet enemy forces had been waiting. The ambush was devastating. Hundreds of wolves died before they could even draw their swords. Someone had betrayed the kingdom. Someone inside the palace. Royal guards searched every noble residence, every office, every private chamber. Then, beneath the false bottom of a drawer inside Queen Evelyn's study, they found copies of the missing battle plans. The entire kingdom stopped breathing. Now those same maps lay before the royal council, each marked with Evelyn's royal seal, each appearing to prove the impossible. Lord Cedric Voss stepped forward. His expression carried carefully measured sorrow. "Your Majesties, no one wishes to believe this, but the evidence is overwhelming." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Several ministers lowered their heads. Others refused to even look at Evelyn. For 5 years, she had been more than their queen. She had designed supply routes during the famine, negotiated peace with rival pacts, created the strategy that ended the civil war without destroying the capital. Many of the soldiers mourning their fallen comrades owed previous victories to her plans. Now, those same victories seemed to have become the perfect disguise for betrayal. Evelyn slowly looked toward her husband, Alpha King Darius Blackmore. He hadn't spoken since the trial began. His hands remained tightly clasped behind his back. His silver eyes never left the evidence. Finally, he looked at her. She searched desperately for certainty, for trust, for the man who had once promised, "If the whole world doubts you, I'll still stand beside you." Instead, she found only heartbreak. "I didn't do this." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I know how it looks. But someone planted those maps." Lord Cedric bowed respectfully. "Then perhaps your Majesty can explain how they came to be hidden beneath your own desk." "I can't." "Convenient." Evelyn ignored him. She looked only at Darius. "You know me." "I do." "Then you know I would never betray our people." Silence, painful, unending. Finally, Darius spoke. His voice sounded older than it had that morning. "I wish I could believe that." Those 7 words broke something inside her. Not because he accused her, because he doubted her. The High Elder rose slowly from his seat. According to the ancient wolf code, treason against the crown carries only one punishment. He struck his ceremonial staff against the marble floor. Exile. The chamber became perfectly still. Every eye turned toward the Alpha King. Only he possessed the authority to overturn the council's recommendation. Darius closed his eyes. He remembered every battle they had survived together, every late night spent planning defenses, every promise they had whispered beneath the stars. He also remembered the hundreds of soldiers whose families were now grieving. A king belonged to his people before himself. When he finally opened his eyes, they were filled with tears. "Luna Evelyn Ashcroft." His voice cracked. "You are hereby banished from the Alpha Kingdom." No one moved. No one breathed. Evelyn bowed her head. She did not plead. She did not scream. She simply whispered, "If that is your judgment, I will obey." As she turned toward the great doors, her hand instinctively rested against her stomach. It was such a small movement that almost no one noticed. Almost. Standing near the back of the hall, the elderly royal physician saw it. His face drained of color. He had examined Evelyn only the previous evening. He knew something no one else in that throne room knew. The queen wasn't leaving alone, and unless he reached her before sunrise, the Alpha King would unknowingly banish not just his innocent Luna, but the 2 tiny lives growing beneath her heart. Before dawn, Evelyn crossed the eastern border alone. The kingdom she had helped build disappeared behind a curtain of morning mist. She did not look back, not because it no longer mattered, because she knew, if she looked even once, she might lose the strength to keep riding. The winter wind cut through her travel cloak. Snow crunched beneath her horse's hooves. Every mile carried her farther from the palace she had once called home, farther from the man she still loved. Just beyond the border marker, a voice called after her. "Your Majesty!" Evelyn gently pulled the reins. The royal physician struggled up the frozen path, breathless from the chase. His gray hair clung to his forehead with melted snow. "You shouldn't have followed me. I had to." He finally reached her horse and placed one trembling hand against the saddle. There was no time before the trial. He removed a sealed parchment from inside his cloak. "I only received the results after the council had already gathered." Evelyn accepted it silently. The royal seal was still intact. She broke it open. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, then stopped. Royal Medical Report. Her Majesty Queen Evelyn Ashcroft, confirmed pregnancy, estimated 8 weeks, twin heartbeat detected. For several long moments, she simply stared. The letters blurred beneath gathering tears. Twins. She instinctively placed both hands over her stomach. A tiny laugh escaped her. Soft, broken, so. She looked toward the distant kingdom hidden beyond the mountains. "They banished 3 people tonight." The physician lowered his head. "I'm so sorry." Fresh tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks. Not because she was afraid, because only yesterday she had imagined telling Darius. She had imagined placing his hand against her stomach, watching his face light up, listening to him laugh in disbelief. Now, their children would enter a world where their father believed their mother was a traitor. The physician stepped closer. "You must return." She folded the medical report carefully. "No, he doesn't know. No. If the king learns you're carrying his heirs," she gently interrupted him. "If he didn't trust my word yesterday, he won't trust this today. He loves you. I know. Then tell him." Evelyn closed her eyes. The council watched him choose duty over his own heart. "I won't ask him to choose differently now, simply because I'm pregnant." The physician's shoulders sagged. "But the children deserve their father." She smiled sadly. "They deserve a father who believes their mother." Silence settled over the mountain pass. The old man realized there was nothing left to say. He reached into his satchel. "There are medicines inside. For the journey. And another examination in 6 weeks." She accepted the small leather pouch. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Where will you go?" "I don't know. For the first time in years, I'm walking toward a future I never planned." She gently urged her horse forward. After several steps, she stopped once more. Without turning around, she spoke quietly. "If you ever see the king again." The physician waited. "Tell him." She swallowed the words. No. There was nothing she could ask him to say. Not anymore. Instead, she smiled through tears. "Take care of yourself." Then she rode into the falling snow. The physician watched until she disappeared beyond the mountains. He whispered a prayer for the woman who had once carried an entire kingdom on her shoulders. Back inside the palace, Darius stood alone in Evelyn's empty chambers. Her gown still hung neatly in the wardrobe. Her books remained on the shelves. Her favorite shawl rested beside the fireplace. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Everything, except her. He picked up the small wooden wolf carving she had once given him during their first winter together. For the first time since pronouncing the sentence of exile, he allowed himself to ask the question he had been too afraid to face. What if she had been telling the truth? He had no way of knowing that beyond the eastern mountains, his innocent queen rode alone through the snow, carrying the future heirs of the Alpha Kingdom beneath her heart. 3 months passed. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. The snow melted from the palace rooftops. Flowers returned to the royal gardens. But inside the Alpha King's palace, nothing felt alive. Darius still entered Evelyn's study every evening. Nothing had been moved. Her ink bottle remained beside the window. Her strategy maps still covered the planning table. The chair where she spent countless nights designing battle formations sat exactly as she had left it. He couldn't bring himself to change anything. Some foolish part of him still believed she might walk through the door. Then one stormy evening, Captain Rowan burst into the throne room. "Your Majesty! The palace guard named Marcus is dying. He says he has information about the ambush." Darius was already on his feet. The palace infirmary smelled of herbs and smoke. Marcus lay pale upon a narrow bed. Every breath sounded painful. Blood stained the bandages wrapped around his chest. When he saw Darius, he struggled to lift his trembling hand. "Your Majesty!" Darius knelt beside him. "I'm here." Marcus coughed violently. "I can't die until you know." "Know what?" The dying guard forced himself to speak. The Queen was innocent. The room fell silent. Darius felt his heartbeat stop. Marcus continued in broken whispers. "It was Lord Cedric. He ordered me to hide the battle maps beneath Her Majesty's desk. He said the Queen would survive exile. But if she stayed, she'd discover everything." Tears streamed down the old guard's face. "I was a coward. I wanted the gold. I told myself no one would die." He reached weakly for Darius's hand. "I'm sorry." With those final words, his hand fell still. The room became unbearably quiet. Darius slowly stood. His face had gone completely expressionless. "Captain Rowan." "Yes, Your Majesty?" "Seal every gate. No one enters. No one leaves. Arrest Lord Cedric Voss." Cedric never reached the palace gates. Royal guards surrounded his estate before dawn. They searched every room, every cellar, every hidden passage. What they found shattered the kingdom. Locked inside a concealed vault were years of secret correspondence with enemy rulers. Payments in foreign gold, military routes, names of bribed officials, forged documents, even blank sheets carrying stolen royal seals. Enough evidence to frame almost anyone. The battle maps discovered beneath Evelyn's desk had been forged only days before the ambush. Every accusation against her had been manufactured. Captain Rowan quietly placed the evidence before Darius. "There can be no doubt now. There never should have been." Darius's voice was barely audible. He looked toward the throne where Evelyn had once sat beside him. She had begged him to believe her. Not because she lacked proof, because she believed 5 years of loyalty should have meant something. He had chosen the documents instead. Before sunset, Darius rode east alone. No royal escort, no banners, only determination. He followed every trail the border guards remembered. Every village, every roadside inn, every shepherd's cottage. Finally, an elderly widow pointed toward a tiny abandoned cabin. A young woman stayed there. Only one night. She cried when she thought no one could hear. Darius rushed inside. The cabin was empty. Dust covered the floor. Only one small wooden cradle stood unfinished in the corner. Beside it rested a folded knitted blanket, and beneath the blanket, a sealed parchment. His hands trembled as he opened it. The Royal Medical Office. His eyes moved across the page, then froze. Confirmed pregnancy. Twin heartbeat detected. The room spun around him. Twins. Evelyn had been carrying twins. His twins. He collapsed onto the rough wooden floor. The medical report slipped from his numb fingers. His innocent wife hadn't crossed the mountains alone. She had carried the future of the Blackmore bloodline beneath her heart. And he had been the one who drove them all away. For the first time in his life, Alpha King Darius Blackmore wept without shame. Not because he had lost his queen, but because he had realized the cruelest truth of all. The day he banished Evelyn, he had unknowingly sentenced his own children to exile beside her. The valley had no name. Travelers rarely found it. Those who did often stayed. Nestled between towering mountains and ancient forests, it was a place where rivers ran clear, children played without fear, and no one cared whether a stranger had once worn a crown. It was there, far beyond the reach of royal politics, that Evelyn began again. The elderly widow who had directed Darius to the abandoned cottage had also guided Evelyn to the hidden valley months earlier. "They don't ask about your past," she had said kindly. "They only ask whether you're willing to help." Evelyn had answered with tears in her eyes. "Then perhaps I've finally found somewhere I belong." When spring arrived, so did the twins. After hours of labor, the tiny cabin echoed with two healthy cries. A boy. The village midwife smiled warmly. And a girl. Evelyn gathered both babies into her arms. The little boy wrapped his tiny fingers around hers with surprising strength. The little girl yawned before settling peacefully against her mother's chest. She kissed each tiny forehead. "Aiden." She smiled at her son. "Because I hope you'll become someone people can depend on." Then she looked at her daughter. "Lyra. Because I hope your kindness will always be stronger than your pain." The babies slept peacefully, unaware that they had been born princes of a kingdom that believed they did not exist. The years passed quietly. Evelyn never spoke of palaces, never spoke of exile, never spoke of betrayal. Instead, she filled their days with lessons, not from royal tutors, from life. She taught Aiden how to solve disagreements by listening before speaking. She taught Lyra how to comfort frightened children before comforting herself. They planted vegetables together, repaired neighbors' fences, delivered food to elderly villagers during harsh winters. Whenever someone needed help, the twins were always the first to volunteer. One evening, after helping rebuild a flooded barn, Aiden looked up at his mother. "Why do we always help people we've never met?" Evelyn smiled as she handed him another wooden beam. "Because kindness loses its meaning if we save it only for the people we already love." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "I like that answer." "So do I." As the children grew older, they began asking the questions Evelyn had always known would come. One summer afternoon, while skipping stones across the river, Lyra asked softly, "Mother, did we ever have a father?" Evelyn's hand paused above the basket she was weaving. "Yes." Aiden looked up immediately. "Where is he?" She watched the sunlight shimmer across the water. Far away, beyond those mountains, stood the kingdom that had once been her home. "He lives very far from here." "Did he leave us?" Lyra asked. Evelyn turned toward her daughter. "No. Life separated us." Aiden frowned. Was he a bad man? For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. She could have filled their hearts with bitterness. She could have told them about the trial, the false evidence, the exile, the tears. Instead, she chose something harder. He made a terrible mistake. She spoke gently. But mistakes are not the same as evil. The twins listened carefully. "Does he know about us?" Aiden asked. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I don't think he does." Lyra slipped her small hand into her mother's. "If we ever meet him, can we decide for ourselves what kind of person he is?" A tear escaped Evelyn's eye. She smiled proudly. "Yes, that's exactly what I want." She hugged them both tightly. In that moment, she knew she had broken the cycle. Her children would inherit compassion instead of resentment, understanding instead of vengeance. 9 years later, the peaceful valley shook beneath a violent roar. The earth split open, mountains crumbled. Villages disappeared beneath clouds of dust. The great earthquake could be felt for hundreds of miles. Without waiting for instructions, Aiden and Lyra began organizing rescue teams. And beyond the mountains, the Alpha Kingdom suffered its greatest natural disaster in generations. Fate, after nearly a decade, was finally leading one broken family back toward each other. The earthquake lasted less than 2 minutes. Its destruction would be remembered for generations. Entire mountainsides had collapsed. Bridges vanished into raging rivers. Roads split apart like cracked glass. The western provinces of the Alpha Kingdom suffered the worst. Hundreds of homes lay buried beneath stone and timber. Families searched the rubble with bleeding hands. Every healer, every soldier, every volunteer was summoned. For the first time in years, the borders opened without question. Neighboring kingdoms sent food, physicians, engineers, and rescue workers. Among the largest relief caravans arriving from the eastern mountains was one led by two children, 14-year-old Aiden and his twin sister, Lyra. Neither wore noble clothing, neither carried royal titles. Yet everyone obeyed them instinctively. "Move the injured into the schoolhouse," Aiden directed calmly. "The stone walls are stronger than the tents." Lyra knelt beside a frightened little boy trapped beneath broken beams. "It's all right," she smiled gently. "We're going to get you out." Within moments, she had organized 6 volunteers into a careful rescue line. The child was free before sunset. People began whispering, "Who are those children? They're extraordinary. They've done this before." King Darius spent every waking hour traveling between devastated villages. His royal cloak was stained with mud. His hands were blistered from lifting fallen timber alongside ordinary workers. Titles meant little when entire communities needed saving. Late one afternoon, he arrived at the village of Stonebrook. A bridge had collapsed, trapping dozens of families on the opposite side of a swollen river. Panic spread through the crowd. Then a clear young voice rose above the chaos. "Don't cross all at once." Aiden pointed toward the damaged bridge. "Use ropes to stabilize each section. Children first, the elderly next. No one runs." His confidence quieted the frightened villagers almost immediately. Nearby, Lyra comforted exhausted mothers while organizing blankets, food, and clean drinking water. She noticed a little girl crying alone beside the riverbank. Without hesitation, she sat beside her. "My brother says brave people cry too." The child sniffled. "Really?" Lyra nodded. "They just don't cry by themselves." Within minutes, 3 other children had gathered around. Soon they were laughing softly, despite the devastation surrounding them. Darius watched from across the square. Something inside him stirred. He couldn't explain it. The boy's calm leadership, the girl's quiet compassion, both felt painfully familiar. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin. "Watch them. Stay close." The instinct was overwhelming. As the rescue continued, Aiden approached Darius, carrying a map he had sketched by hand. "If we redirect the supply wagons through the southern ridge, we can reach 3 isolated villages before nightfall." Darius studied the map. It was brilliant. Simple, efficient. Exactly the kind of strategy Evelyn used to design. He looked up. "What is your name?" "Aiden." "And your sister?" "Lyra." "No family name?" The boy smiled politely. "We've never needed one." Something about that answer tightened Darius's chest. Before he could ask another question, Lyra ran toward them. "Aiden! We found another survivor!" She stopped abruptly upon seeing the king. "Oh!" She bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty!" Darius smiled kindly. "You've both done remarkable work today." Lyra shrugged. "Our mother says helping people isn't remarkable. It's normal. Our mother says titles only matter if they help you serve others." Darius felt his breath catch. Those words, that philosophy, he had heard them before, years ago, from the woman he had never stopped searching for. As evening settled over the valley, the twins packed their supplies. "We should head home." Aiden nodded. "Mother will worry." Without thinking, Darius followed them from a distance, through the forest, across a narrow wooden bridge, toward a quiet riverside cottage where warm light glowed through the windows. The front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch. Her hair was longer now. Her face carried the quiet peace of someone who had survived unimaginable pain. Yet he would have known her anywhere. Evelyn. She looked up. Their eyes met across the fading twilight. Neither moved, neither spoke. But in that single moment, Darius knew two things with absolute certainty. The children were his, and the family he had spent 9 years searching for had finally been found. For a long moment, the world stood still. The evening breeze stirred the wildflowers beside the cottage. The river flowed quietly through the valley. Aiden and Lyra looked from their mother to the stranger standing at the edge of the path. Neither child understood why the air suddenly felt so heavy. Evelyn was the first to speak. "Children!" Her voice remained calm. "Would you give us a few minutes?" Lyra glanced curiously between them. "Do you know him?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Aiden studied Darius carefully, then smiled politely. "We'll be by the river." The twins disappeared down the narrow path, laughing as they skipped stones across the water. Only after they were out of earshot did silence return. Darius looked at Evelyn. His voice barely existed. "I know." She nodded. "They're yours." The words struck him harder than any battlefield wound. His knees gave way. He knelt in the grass before her. Not because she demanded it, because he no longer knew how to carry the weight of his regret. "I'm sorry." The apology was almost too small for everything it needed to hold. Evelyn looked down at him. "I know. I searched for you. I know. I crossed every neighboring kingdom. I know. I never stopped. I know." Every answer came gently, without anger, without accusation, only quiet truth. He closed his eyes. "When I found the medical report," his voice broke, "I realized I hadn't banished one innocent person. I had banished my entire family." A tear escaped Evelyn's eye. "I cried for many nights. I know, I hated myself. I know, I wanted to die." She stepped forward immediately. "No." He looked up. "No child deserves to grow up believing they were born, because someone chose death over love." She knelt until they were eye level. "I won't allow my children to carry that burden." Darius nodded through tears. "I'm sorry. I know." She smiled sadly. "And someday, I hope you'll forgive yourself." He looked toward the river, where Aiden and Lyra laughed together. "They're extraordinary." "They are. You raised them beautifully. We had help." The entire valley became their family. He swallowed hard. "I missed everything. Their first steps, their first words, their birthdays. The day Aiden learned to fish. The day Lyra rescued an injured fox and refused to leave its side until it recovered." His voice trembled. "I wasn't there. No, you weren't." Silence stretched between them. Finally, he whispered the words he had carried for nearly a decade. "Please, come home." Evelyn looked toward the cottage. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Wildflowers surrounded the small garden. Children's laughter echoed across the valley. Then she turned back to Darius. "I already built one." He lowered his eyes. "I know. My children grew up surrounded by kindness. They learned compassion. They learned that power exists to protect." She smiled softly. "I won't take that away from them." "I wouldn't ask you to," he answered immediately. She looked surprised. "I came here hoping to find my family." He took a slow breath. "I didn't realize they had already found a life." He stood slowly. "So I won't ask you to leave it." The sincerity in his voice made her pause. He wasn't trying to reclaim authority. He wasn't demanding forgiveness. For the first time, he was accepting the consequences of his own choices. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. Darius looked toward the village still rebuilding after the earthquake. "I'll stay. There are homes to rebuild, fields to clear, children who need teachers. I can't undo the years I lost. But perhaps I can spend the years I have left becoming someone my children would be proud to know. Evelyn watched him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since her exile, she believed he truly understood what justice required. Not another apology, a different life. The next morning, Darius was already awake before sunrise. Not because a royal attendant had announced the day, because an elderly carpenter knocked on the cottage door. "If you're serious about helping, we start early," Darius smiled. "I'll be there." Within minutes, he traded his royal cloak for plain work clothes borrowed from one of the villagers. No crown, no jeweled sword, no royal insignia, only worn leather gloves and a hammer. The villagers watched him with cautious curiosity. No one bowed, no one treated him like a king. They treated him like another pair of hands. It was exactly what he wanted. The earthquake had destroyed dozens of homes. Every day, Darius worked beside farmers, blacksmiths, and fishermen. He hauled timber, mixed mortar, repaired roofs. When an elderly widow apologized for asking a king to carry heavy stones, he simply smiled. "Today, I'm only your neighbor." Word spread quickly. The Alpha King wasn't commanding the rebuilding effort. He was helping build it. At first, Aiden and Lyra kept their distance. They were polite, respectful, but cautious. Darius never forced conversations. He understood trust had to be earned, not inherited. One afternoon, Aiden struggled to lift a fallen oak log blocking the road. Without speaking, Darius stepped beside him. Together, they pushed until the log rolled safely away. Aiden wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Thank you," Darius smiled. "You had most of it." The boy laughed. "I definitely didn't." It was the first time they had laughed together. Lyra proved more difficult. She watched people carefully before deciding whether to trust them. One rainy evening, she found Darius sitting alone outside the cottage, quietly repairing one of her broken fishing nets. "You know how to do that?" she asked. "Barely." He held up the uneven knot. "I think the net may be offended," she giggled. "My grandfather taught me a better way." She sat beside him, patiently undoing his crooked stitches before showing him the proper technique. "There," she smiled proudly. "Now the fish won't escape." Darius looked at her. "You've become a wonderful teacher," she shrugged. "Mother says teaching someone is another way of being kind." His chest tightened. That sounded exactly like Evelyn. Weeks became months. The valley slowly healed. Children returned to school. New homes rose where broken ones had once stood. One evening, Evelyn stood quietly beside Margaret, the elderly healer who had first rescued her years ago. "You've been watching him." Margaret smiled knowingly. "I have. What do you think?" The old woman looked toward Darius, who was helping several children repair a wooden bridge after supper. "I think he stopped trying to prove he deserves forgiveness. And he simply started living like the man he wishes he'd been." Evelyn remained silent, because she knew Margaret was right. Nearly a year passed. One warm spring afternoon, Darius sat alone beside the river, untangling fishing lines. He didn't notice Aiden and Lyra approaching until their shadows crossed the water. The twins exchanged a nervous glance. Finally, Aiden spoke. "Mother says, people can change." Darius looked up slowly. "She does." Lyra stepped closer. "And we think." She hesitated before smiling. "She's usually right." His hands trembled. Neither child seemed to notice. Aiden shifted awkwardly. "We're going fishing." He looked at the extra fishing rod resting beside Darius. "We were wondering." Another long pause. Then Lyra reached for his hand. "Would you like to come with us?" Darius couldn't answer immediately. His throat closed. His eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a title they had given him. Not yet. It wasn't forgiveness. Not completely. It was something far more precious. An invitation. The first one they had ever offered. He smiled through trembling lips. "I'd like that very much." As the three of them walked toward the riverbank together, Evelyn watched from the cottage porch. She felt no pressure, no obligation, only quiet hope. The children had opened the door, not because anyone asked them to, because they had seen enough to decide for themselves. For the first time since the day of her banishment, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine a future where returning to the kingdom might no longer feel like returning to the place she had lost everything. It might become the place where her family finally found one another again. 2 years later, the royal bells rang across the Alpha Kingdom. Not to announce a victory, not to celebrate a coronation, but to welcome home the queen who had once left in silence. The capital overflowed with people. Many remembered the day Evelyn had been banished. They remembered lowering their eyes as she walked through the palace gates alone. Now, those same streets were lined with white flowers instead of whispers. No one celebrated, because a queen had returned. They celebrated because justice finally had. Evelyn rode beside Darius. Neither tried to erase the past. They simply acknowledged it. When they reached the palace steps, Darius stopped before entering. He turned toward the crowd. Years earlier, he had sentenced an innocent woman before these same people. Today, he intended to finish what justice had failed to do. "My people," his voice carried across the silent square. "Years ago, I believed evidence without demanding truth. I condemned an innocent queen. I failed as a husband, and I failed as your king." The crowd remained perfectly still. Darius stepped aside. "This throne stands today only because Queen Evelyn chose compassion instead of revenge." He bowed his head before her, not as a ceremony, as gratitude. Applause slowly spread through the square, then grew louder. Soon, the entire capital echoed with it. Many citizens wiped away tears. Some had once doubted Evelyn. Others had remained silent when she needed them most. Today, they welcomed her home. Standing between them were 2 teenagers, Prince Aidan, Princess Lyra. Neither wore elaborate royal clothing. Both had insisted on simple uniforms like those they wore while helping rebuild villages. The royal herald raised his staff, presenting their royal highnesses, the heirs to the Alpha Kingdom. The twins exchanged embarrassed smiles. Lyra whispered, "I still don't like everyone staring." Aidan chuckled, "Neither do I." Evelyn leaned toward them. "Good. A ruler should never become too comfortable being admired." The first decree of the restored royal court surprised everyone. It wasn't about taxes, or trade, or the military. It was about justice. Evelyn stood before the Grand Council, holding the old trial records, the same documents that had once destroyed her life. "I don't wish to erase what happened," she said calmly. "I want every future generation to remember it." She placed the records into the royal archives. They will remain here, not as a monument to shame, but as a warning. Then she presented a new law. No member of the royal family, nor any citizen of this kingdom, may ever again be convicted of treason without an independent investigation. The accused shall have the right to examine evidence, the right to present witnesses, and the right to a public defense. The chancellor looked toward Darius. He signed the decree immediately, without changing a single word. This should have existed long before today. The law passed unanimously. Lord Cedric Voss's name quietly disappeared from every royal monument. His estates were converted into schools. His treasury funded scholarships for orphaned children whose parents had died during the war. His treachery helped create. Evelyn insisted upon it. "We cannot undo suffering, but we can choose what grows where suffering once lived." That evening, the royal family walked through the palace gardens, the same gardens where Evelyn and Darius had once dreamed about raising children together. Now, Aidan laughed as he tried to teach Lyra how to fence without tripping over her own feet. She deliberately knocked his practice sword into the fountain. "I won. You cheated. I improvised." Darius laughed harder than either of them. Evelyn watched quietly. For years, She had believed those moments had been stolen forever. Instead, they had simply arrived later than expected. She slipped her hand into Darius's. "You know," she smiled softly, "I almost forgot what home felt like." He gently squeezed her hand. "So did I." But this time, he looked toward their children. "We built it on truth." Above the palace, the evening sky glowed gold. For the first time since the day of her exile, Queen Evelyn looked at the kingdom before her and truly felt that she had come home. 30 years later, the children who once watched Queen Evelyn leave the kingdom in tears had become grandparents themselves. The story of her banishment had long since passed into history, but no one was allowed to forget its lesson. Every new judge appointed to the Royal Hall of Justice began their first day the same way. Before hearing a single case, they stood beneath an inscription, carved into white stone. "Justice without truth is only another form of cruelty." No one entered the courtroom without reading those words. No one left without remembering them. King Darius had grown old. His once dark hair had turned silver. The sword that had defended the kingdom for decades now rested peacefully inside a display case. He no longer measured his strength by victories in battle. He measured it by the number of innocent lives protected by the laws born from his greatest mistake. One crisp autumn morning, a young prince from a neighboring kingdom asked him, "Your Majesty, what is the first duty of a king?" The old Alpha smiled. "To seek the truth." The prince nodded confidently. "Even if the evidence seems obvious?" Darius's expression grew thoughtful. "Especially then." He looked toward the Hall of Justice. "Evidence tells you what happened. Truth tells you why. And if you judge before finding both, you may destroy the very people you were sworn to protect." The young prince lowered his head. "I'll remember. I hope so." Darius smiled gently. "Because forgetting cost me nearly everything." Queen Evelyn spent her later years expanding schools, hospitals, and leadership academies across the kingdom. Whenever young rulers visited seeking advice, they expected stories about war strategy. Instead, she told them about compassion. "The hardest thing you'll ever do is refuse to let someone else's mistake become your children's inheritance." Students wrote those words into their journals. Many later called them the finest lesson they had ever received. Prince Aidan grew into a wise strategist. Princess Lyra became beloved for her work among the villages, where she continued the traditions of service she had learned in the Hidden Valley. Neither child carried bitterness toward the father they had met only later in life. Not because the years apart had not mattered, but because both parents had taught them that healing requires truth, and truth requires grace. One spring evening, the royal family gathered beneath the ancient oak overlooking the palace gardens. Grandchildren chased butterflies through the flowers. Their laughter echoed across the hills. Darius watched them quietly, then turned to Evelyn. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been if Cedric had never framed you?" She smiled gently. "Sometimes." And she looked toward the children. "I think we would have been happy." She reached for his hand. "But perhaps we would never have learned how precious trust truly is." He nodded slowly. "I spent years wishing I could erase my mistake. And now I simply try to make sure no one else repeats it." Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder. "That's all any of us can do." When historians later wrote about King Darius and Queen Evelyn, they did not describe them as rulers with a perfect love story. They wrote about a king who had the courage to admit his greatest failure before an entire kingdom. They wrote about a queen who refused to let injustice harden her heart. Together, they transformed personal tragedy into lasting reform. Their greatest legacy was not the throne, nor the victories they won, nor even the twin heirs who succeeded them. It was a kingdom where no innocent soul would ever again be condemned without the truth being fully heard. And every generation remembered how that promise began. An innocent queen was banished for a crime she never committed. A grieving king discovered too late that he had exiled not only the woman he loved, but also the 2 children she carried beneath her heart. Yet because they chose truth over pride, compassion over revenge, and justice over appearances, their family became living proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when people have the courage to face the truth together.